Okay. Um, I want to do a couple of quick introductions of a couple of new people, and then we'll jump right into Aaron. Are you going to be okay if we're going to put Morgan on first? You're going to be okay with that?
Me, Aaron? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, she's going to have to head out of here pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started this morning. We have a couple of really good presentations. As you may know, those of you who attended last week may know that we had we started a discussion on what's happening in Washington, and Judy Soltrip has arranged to have Morgan here. And Judy, I'm going to ask you to introduce Morgan in just a minute. Um, but she reminded me that we need to be clear with everybody. There's a caveat that there's things we know, things we don't know, and things we think we know, and that's changing from day to day. So anyway, just wanted to make that caveat. So if we can just do a couple of quick introductions, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I think we have one or two new people. Sharon, want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Sharon Tewksbury Bloom. I'm located in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I met Aaron at the Rural Policy Forum and expressed an interest in learning more about what's going on with digital access throughout the state, but particularly in rural areas in northern Arizona. And
Sounds
I run my own business as a professional facilitator.
great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us this morning. Um, so Coral, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. Coral Evans, Northern Arizona Director for U.S. Senator Mark Kelly.
We have a great turnout from excuse me, from the senator's office this morning. I appreciate that, Judy, for your help with that. Anybody else that's new today? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over, Morgan, to Judy. If you want to introduce Morgan real quickly, and then we'll just go ahead and get started.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I want to introduce Morgan Gilbrow. She is my colleague in DC. She is the senator's legislative liaison for all things rural broadband, and she is here today to give us an update on what she knows and everything in flux. So take it away, Morgan.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Morgan,
Thanks,
you're up.
Judy. Awesome. Okay. Well, lovely to join all of you guys virtually today. Happy to be connected. And as Judy mentioned, I am the senator's legislative assistant here in DC, handling, among other things, all things telecom and rural broadband. So, happy to provide kind of an update of what things are looking like now. And as we head into a new Congress, a new administration, there will, as Steve did, caveat being there's a lot we still don't know. There's a lot in flux. So, but happy to provide kind of an update on some things we do. So, I'll touch on a number of things. The first, some news out of the incoming President Trump's transition related to some, nominations, personnel changes, as well as some changes that we expect to see coming out of the Commerce Committee under incoming Chair Cruz. We'll look at what we've been hearing from Brendan Carr about what FCC might be focusing on. And then I have some updates on Rip and Replace, ACP, and BEAD. So diving on in, and if folks have questions, I have to jump at 10:30 today, but I'm always happy to jump on the phone. I'll drop my email in the chat, as well as my work phone if anybody has questions or wants to discuss further. And then obviously Judy and Coral are here from the Senator's team as well. Our emails are always open. That being said, so when it comes to the FCC kind of personnel changes, and most of you will probably already know this, President Trump has indicated that he plans to have Brendan Carr become the new chair of the FCC. current FCC chair, Rosen Worcel, has already said that she plans to observe tradition and step down on the day that incoming President Trump is sworn in. And then he will then designate Brendan Carr to take over leadership. There have also been rumors kind of circulating that Commissioner Starks intends to leave the FCC. He is currently, this has been kind of a rumor for a little bit, but he's placing increasing pressure from Leader Schumer to stay on temporarily, at least, to kind of help ensure that the commission stays deadlocked, at least to make it a little bit harder for Carr and for the incoming administration to kind of implement any of their immediate changes. Try to delay some things as much as we can. As long as Starks and Gomez stay on, Carr's ability to carry out his agenda will be pretty limited. So that's something to keep an eye on. NTIA, there hasn't been an announcement yet on who the incoming Trump administration intends to lead the NTIA, if Alan Davidson will stay. I think that might be pretty surprising given so much of the recent criticism that the BEAD program and NTIA has faced related to BEAD implementation, but it is something to keep an eye on. When it comes to the Commerce Committee, and there's a lot that will kind of be changing in commerce in the Commerce Committee, but I'm focusing specifically on kind of like the telecom space. But obviously, commerce handles many other things as well. So, in looking at what reporting has said, Cruz has indicated that his priorities for this Congress will be job creation and reducing regulation. But there are some other things that he said to indicate kind of what his priorities will be in the telecom and tech space, especially with regards to spectrum, AI, and broadband. When it comes to spectrum, Cruz has said that he wants to get more wireless spectrum that's currently reserved for the government into the hands of the private sector. He has introduced legislation that would mandate the auction of a considerable amount of spectrum that is raising red flags for the current administration's number of agencies, including DoD. Given Senator Kelly's position on the Senate Armed Services Committee, this is something that we'll be watching very closely and share concerns about, making sure that no efforts to auction off spectrum will impact defense or intelligence capabilities. Above all, though, Cruz has indicated that one of his top priorities will mean reauthorizing the FCC's ability, the authority to auction off spectrum. That has been really, there's bipartisan support for reinstating that auction authority. However, it has really been kind of used as a bargaining chip. I think there.
Yeah. Katrina, can you please mute?
Perfect. So we'll see, but that is definitely a priority across the board to reinstate that auction authority. When it comes to AI, Cruz's contribution is really, his focus so far has been on non-consensual AI-enabled images and the forced takedown of those. He had a bill that I believe was passed on the floor on Tuesday, but he's made some progress on this. This is likely to continue to be a priority of his next year. And then on broadband, Senator Cruz has promised to really dig into NTIA's efforts when it comes to BEAD. So this is something that we're paying very close attention to. There's been a lot of noise around BEAD and the BEAD program being targeted by the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's committee. I don't even know what we call it. It's the organization that doesn't have any legislative power. Anyways, Senator Ernst has targeted BEAD so it's something that she's recommended that BEAD be one of the cost-cutting mechanisms that DOGE uses. So we're concerned about that, given obviously the significant impact that BEAD will have in the state. We'll continue to fight for every dollar that Arizona has been allocated to make sure that it does come and is implemented in the state of Arizona. Senator Cruz has said specifically when it comes to BEAD that he wants to look into rate regulation, unionized workforce, and as he says, DEI labor requirements, as well as climate change assessments and excessive per location costs. So those are some things that he has indicated his concerns with already and that we'll be following closely. Those are some things that will be happening in commerce. When it comes to FCC, we're kind of looking at what reporting has come out about what Commissioner Carr has indicated his interests and priorities to be. He is ready to hit the ground running. And just this week, was speaking at a panel where he discussed wanting to move aggressively on USF reform as well as jumpstarting spectrum policy. So we anticipate there to be a lot of movement happening pretty quickly coming out of the FCC. One of the things that he specifically said was that requiring tech companies to pay into USF is, and I quote, something that is definitely worth taking a look at. So that, from our perspective, is good news. And I'll talk a little bit about Senator Kelly's efforts on USF reform in a moment. But he has also emphasized that USF should adopt tech neutral provisions to make room for fixed wireless and satellite. So obviously, Commissioner Carr is very close with Elon Musk and has been very vocal about his concerns about the Biden administration's efforts to restrict funding for Starlink. And so we anticipate that to be a priority of Commissioner Carr's moving forward, whether that be with regard to BEAD, USF, or other kind of telecommunications and broadband funding sources. So again, something else to keep in mind, especially given that fiber really continues to be what we consider to be the gold standard, making sure people are connected and making sure that we're not sacrificing that technology in pursuit of funding Starlink. Commissioner Carr has also indicated his support for what he calls a balanced approach on spectrum. So making sure he has highlighted that under President Trump's first term, the FCC was very successful in conflicts over spectrum when it came to competing with federal users, but that these efforts have really been stymied under the Biden administration. So we anticipate a continued focus on that. When it comes to the Democrats that will continue on to the commission, FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez said that she will continue to look for places of bipartisan agreement. She has highlighted robocalls as a potential issue where we can find collaboration. And Commissioner Starks has indicated his focus will continue to be on connecting underserved populations. That's what we can anticipate. A few things to come out of the FCC. When it comes to a couple priorities that we're continuing to work on, rip and replace is a big one, obviously huge impact in Arizona. Conversations are for a long time. The real focus has been on tying rip and replace and ACP together. At this point, we know that that's not feasible right now, and we really need to there's a lot of bipartisan support for funding the rip and replace shortfall. So there's been some momentum towards attaching funding for rip and replace either to the disaster supplemental or the NDAA, both of which will need to be passed in the next about 3 weeks. So that is not locked in at this point, but momentum is positive in securing that funding. Obviously, ACP, that's not going to happen right now. We will have to kind of refocus our efforts on ACP in the new year and in a new Congress, which I know is disappointing to probably all of us, but is going to continue to be a priority of a lot of us on the Hill to make sure that we're getting this funding. One of the things that is important to the senator to myself and to a lot of us is making sure that ACP is funded in a sustainable way so that it's not reliant on annual appropriations. So as I'm sure many of you already know, the idea here and kind of what a lot of people think is that ACP needs to really be rolled into the USF and likely kind of replace or in conjunction with the Lifeline program. Those conversations are happening. Going back to the positives that we can expect out of FCC Commissioner Carr, his interest in revising the USF will hopefully benefit ACP in the long run. This is something that Senator Lujan's team is working really closely on. The USF Reform Working Group has kind of fallen stagnant. The Senator Kelly is not a part of that working group, but we do get regular updates from their teams. But are hoping to kind of reinvigorate that effort in the new year with a focus on USF. In terms of what Senator Kelly is working on in this space, he has introduced a bipartisan bill with Senators Mullen, Crapo, Risch, Braun, Hawley, and Kramer. This Congress, S3321, it's the Lowering Broadband Costs for Consumers Act. This bill has done a lot of work in addressing USF funding mechanism reforms. And I'm happy to drop afterwards some information about our bill specifically in the chat. We're having conversations about the best ways to kind of continue to pursue this effort in the new Congress. But specifically our bill, it would require big companies, tech companies, to help pay for the USF. Obviously, as y'all know, FCC funds broadband expansion through assessments on like telephone calls and landline telephone service providers, but broadband service providers and what we termed edge providers. So like big tech companies do not pay into the USF in the way, but they benefit from it. So we would amend the funding mechanism to assess broadband providers and edge providers to help pay for the USF. That is the USF/ACP. And then lastly, BEAD. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of noise about BEAD funding being clawed back, about changes to the rules being made in order to benefit, frankly, Elon Musk. All of these things are concerns that we're paying very close attention to. We've been in touch with, in regular contact with the governor's office, with ACA. I'm sure there's some folks from ACA on here, with Sandeep. So making sure that ACA has all the resources that they need to get this money out the door, and we'll continue to work and serve as a liaison with NTIA as challenges arise. But we're really excited to see these broadband investments be deployed in Arizona, and we'll continue to fight for them as we move forward. That was a lot that I just threw at you. So if anybody has questions, I have a few minutes before I have to jump off. I can't promise to have answers, but wanted to, more than anything, introduce myself, open myself up as a resource as folks have questions. And if there's anything that the senator can do or that I can do to, have conversations about the stuff that y'all are working on, happy to do so moving forward. But we'll kind of toss it back over to you, Steve, Judy, or Coral. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but that's it from me. Alana, it's S3321. Here, I'll drop it in the chat right now. Where did it go?
Can you tell me what rip and replace means?
Yes.
On the phone.
Rip and Replace is a program to tear out and replace telecommunications infrastructure that is owned by Chinese telecom companies, so ZTE and Huawei. A lot of smaller rural providers had a lot of this infrastructure in their networks, and it's deemed a national security and communication security risk. And so Congress required the removal of that infrastructure. And originally it was funded at, I believe, $3 billion. I can't remember what it was funded at originally, but there was much more of this infrastructure in place than was originally anticipated. So there wasn't enough funding to complete the tearing out and replacing of the infrastructure. So Congress is working to fund that shortfall.
And
It's
a
about
lot of,
oh,
this is
Jason.
Jason Tamura. Yeah, one of the things I mentioned, it was also there was a lot of large national carriers that had a lot of that Huawei equipment for their backhaul. So it wasn't just rural; it was proliferated through our network.
Mhm.
Questions for Morgan?
Morgan, this is Mala from the State Library, Arizona State Library. I work on the E-rate program for public libraries. And we are gathering stories from the ground on how the USF funds and E-rate is funded through the USF funds, how they have benefited the community. If you pass on your email when I gather these stories, I can send them to you because they will be really valuable. They are from the actual consumers of E-rate through our libraries. I'll see if I can gather some from schools as well, because we have schools and libraries as a consortium in many of our applications for E-rate.
That would be great. I'll drop my email in the chat so everybody has, oh, pardon me, so everybody has it too. And feel free to reach out, or happy to answer other questions or talk further. Anybody else?
So Morgan, is there?
Yeah.
Can they claw back the BEAD money? I guess I understood that pretty much now that it's all pretty much been committed. Can they still claw that back? And then of course there's the digital equity money. And where is that at this point in time? Again, not that we know, but what your thoughts might be about that.
I do not have a lot of good answers on this, unfortunately. There are a lot of questions that have arisen. Incoming President Trump has indicated that he's interested in using this process called impoundment to essentially use his executive distinction and executive powers to claw back funding that Congress has appropriated. It hasn't. There are a lot of restrictions on this, and there's a lot of open questions about whether he can actually do this. I know we have the Congressional Research Service is putting together briefings to explain whether or not this can actually happen. I think there's a lot of questions about its constitutionality, its legality. We don't really know. BEAD has just been one of the things that's been highlighted because it's an easy target. I'm hoping and hopeful that because funds have been allocated, there's distinctions between the allocation, the obligation, and the expenditure, and at what point in time impoundment can still happen. There's a lot of open questions. So unfortunately, I don't really know. In terms of digital equity, it's my understanding that incoming Chair Cruz has similarly expressed a lot of concerns about some of these other pots of funding, but there's a lot of open questions about what can actually be done in terms of whether these funds can be recaptured and what's going to be targeted. We don't really know, but we'll be continuing to track. And it looks like, Alana, you might have some insight from NTIA.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's Elena from Common Sense.
Elena, sorry,
I was on a call.
Sorry,
that's okay, Maureen. Yeah, it's the font. So on the call yesterday, the question, of course, came up, and they said that it wasn't likely that the digital equity money would be clawed back, and that the BEAD funding is basically a statute and was approved, and they don't know if there's a tool or something that could be used to claw back the money, and they're hoping, yes, Aaron, the parts of the digital equity that have been allocated, yeah. So yeah, like you said, nobody really knows, but they did bring up the same issue, and they did say that the DE money that was allocated probably wouldn't be touched, but who knows.
Okay, so Aaron, Morgan, I know you're kind of out of time here today. Morgan has asked that we include her on our meeting notices, and that she will try to be here when she can. And we're going to continue these sessions at this point, because everything, as you heard, is very much in flux at this point. And what we know today and what we know tomorrow could change dramatically. But Morgan, really thank you for the time, for being here today. You did a great job of giving us a good update on what's happening.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Like I said, dropped my email in the chat. So if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out, or happy to just talk about what you guys are doing on the ground in Arizona. And Judy and Coral are here too. Judy, thanks for getting me to come. Steve, thanks for everything.
You bet.
Yes,
Thank you,
I have to
Morgan.
jump, but hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. So a couple of quick things before I forget. I try to remind people every time that, and I think Coro, you asked about this. After every meeting, I do send out the recording of the meeting, the transcript, the chat, and the attendance list, so that you will have access to all of that information. And we do that every week. And then the second thing is that if you are interested in getting the chat before I send it out, you can download it to your computer. If you go to chat, and at the very top, there's 3 ellipses. And if you click on those, you can download the chat to your computer. So I know some people, because we put links and stuff in that. And related to that is that I do try to include in my newsletter all the time anything that people share about meetings coming up, announcements and things like that, with the links to make it easier for people to find that. So I just wanted to remind you about that. So with that, let's move on. Let me see here just real quickly. Brian, do you have to drop off, or can you hang on for a few minutes while we get an update from Aaron from the
Sure, I
broadband
can.
office?
Yeah, I can hang on, no problem.
Sounds good. So Aaron, why don't we go back to you, and you and Kelly, and give us an update on what's happening with the broadband office.
Sure thing. Thanks, Steve. I'm actually going to let Kelly go first, because there's more on the BEAD side of things than there is on DE.
Thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Crucy. I'm the Community Engagement Manager from the State Broadband Office at the Arizona Commerce Authority. So we just got some great updates, which was very helpful, from Senator Kelly's office. They have been great partners and advocates for Arizona, and working closely with us. We appreciate all of their efforts, and really hoping some good will come out of these conversations, because as everybody's saying, there's a lot of unknowns right now. And as of now, we are still moving forward with plans as they are. And so what I want to share today are our plans. Some of our plans are changing. So a couple of things. First and foremost, we have a new website. This is part of the governor's initiative for broadband, and she had, I think, a press release is coming out today. But our website is live, and it's the Connect All Arizona. I'll put a link in the chat right now. And this is where the broadband and BEAD and anything related to broadband and also digital equity lives. So it's on this website. Our old URL does redirect to this. So it's still, like, nothing on your end is changing. You will be redirected to this new site. And just want to share that. So it's a beautiful site. That's something that the governor's office has been working on with us for a while. Excited to launch that. And then as this is launching, also we are in the middle right now, or not in the middle, but started about a month ago, the pre-registration process. So that continues, and I'll put a link in here for that website, which also remains the same, that pre-registration. So that it opened on November 4th. And a date that has changed in the application window process is when that window opens. Originally, it was going to be December 20th, and just yesterday it was approved to push that to January 6th. So the website has been updated, our materials have been updated. What this means is it doesn't change anything with pre-registration, that remains the same, but the date that the window for the BEAD application, that will now open on January 6th. And then the close date for that window is now 30 days. So it was 30 days before, that pushes it now to February 5th is when that first application, the round one of applications, will close. So January 6th to February 5th is what we're looking at there. So we are updating timelines and getting all of our communications ready to send those out this week regarding that date change, but this pushes it back to after the holidays with when it will open. And then the biggest questions after this are, when will the final project areas be released? When will the guidance documents be released? And those will be released before the application window opens. We're really pushing to release those right before the holidays so that there's a little bit of time to take a look at those so that when that application window opens on the 6th, people will have had some time to dig into those materials. So I think those are my two big things, the website and that date change. Definitely want to know if there's any questions from the group.
Questions for Kelly? So Kelly, I have a couple of questions. One is that in some states, providers have decided that they don't want to participate in BEAD because of too many requirements and challenges and so forth. What are we hearing from the providers here in Arizona in terms of participation in BEAD?
Good question. And as of now, we're not hearing that at all. We are hosting office hours on Tuesdays, and to answer questions about that pre-registration process, help with the nuts and bolts of that. And we're getting a lot of good questions. We're seeing a good number of ISPs register in the pre-registration portal. So, giving us signs indicating that so far, like, we have not had any ISPs tell us we're not interested, we're not going to be applying. During market sounding, we had a lot of good feedback and input and a lot of meetings with ISPs. So there is definite interest, and we're seeing that in those pre-registration numbers. So at this time, those aren't things that we are hearing. But we are keeping an eye on that too, and also really trying to make sure that we are pushing information out to ISPs to make sure that they've got what they need, and hopefully having conversations with us to let us know if that is something that's going to be happening, but we haven't heard that yet.
And then a second question is about threshold for alternative technologies. Can you talk about that at all?
As far as what I can speak to is applying. I know that round one is focused on the fiber, but we also want anyone who is interested in applying for the alternative technologies. We want those applications to come in whenever they can. So round two is focused on the alternative, but we don't want anyone to miss an opportunity. So we want those applications to come in, fiber and alternative technology.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Kelly? Going once, going twice. Mike, did you have something? So moving on then, Aaron, can you give us a quickie update on what's happening with DI?
Yes, very quick. Nothing's changed. We're still waiting for our final approval from NTIA on our application. All signs still keep us on that end of the year, beginning of next year timeline. There's been obviously a lot of movement in that area just because NTIA is, dealing with both the state capacity applications and also the national, the competitive applications that were open at the same time. So I don't have any real updates other than that. We're still, in conversations, and we actually had a few more curing items coming. These were from NIST, which is the last piece of the approval puzzle. So, it's all the budget side of things and making sure that that piece is correct. And so I'm optimistic that we're still on the same timeline, to get approval by, the end of this year or early next year, but I don't have any specific dates. For folks who know, the next pieces of that puzzle will be us announcing our subgrant process and all of that. We do hope to have at least a 2-month runway for that window to open, though. So even if we get, that application approved at the final hour, it's not like the application for the subgrants is going to open January 1st. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about next steps once we have that approval. And once we have that approval, we have 9 months to get back to NTIA and let them know what all of the exact, subawardees will be, all of the bigger, the statewide agency projects, things like that. So we'll be able to share all of that once we get that approval and move into those next steps.
Okay. Questions, comments for Aaron? Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you, Aaron. Always good to see you, Ella. And Kelly, thank you for being here today. It's good to see you. And thanks for the beat update. Okay, moving on. Excuse me. So we have another presentation today. One of the issues that is before Washington at this time is talking about spectrum. And so I want to turn it over to our next presenter. Excuse me. Are you there, Brian?
I am here. Yeah, thank you.
So there's Brian Daly, VP for, excuse me, for AT&T, and he's also very engaged with a lot of other issues regarding cybersecurity and so forth. So with that, Brian, I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to turn it over to you and give people a little more background about you, and then just whatever you want to share with us.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Again, just as an introduction, I'm Brian Daly. My day job is with AT&T. I do support a number of other efforts, though, in my role at AT&T, including a member of the FCC's Technological Advisory Council and the FCC's Communication Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council as well. I look at a broad variety of topics, including the evolution of technology from 5G to 6G. Look at security-related topics, as Steve mentioned, as well as industry standards and the evolution of industry standards to support the technology evolution. So what I'd like to talk about today is just a little bit on the spectrum, where we are and where we may be headed. I think Morgan's presentation gave a bit of insight into some of that. Especially with the change that we're going to see within the FCC itself. One of the main problems we've had on spectrum policy in the U.S. over the past couple of years now is that the FCC's auction authority actually expired back in 2023. I think it was October of 2023, and Congress has not reauthorized the FCC to auction off spectrum. So things have been in pretty much of a standstill regarding spectrum since that time. And until such time as Congress comes back and gives the auction authority back to the FCC so that they can auction off spectrum, to wireless operators, not much is going to happen within the commission and within commission spectrum policy. That said, there are a few things that have happened recently that are notable. First, the FCC has approved SpaceX to construct, deploy, and operate their Gen 2 satellite constellations. And that's important because what it does is provides supplemental coverage from space for mobile operators, in this case, T-Mobile, to use SpaceX satellites to do direct-to-handset services. And this didn't require new spectrum. It's actually utilizing T-Mobile spectrum, one of the old personal communication services spectrum allocations that T-Mobile has. But it does at least provide the authority to go ahead and move forward with that. There are other satellite constellations being put into orbit in order to support direct-to-handset services, including AST, which has relationships with both AT&T and Verizon. The FCC is also issuing a proposed rulemaking. There is a band up at 37 gigahertz, which is getting up there in the higher frequency ranges, that is currently utilized by the DoD. And what wireless operators would like to do is to share that band between the commercial users as well as the Department of Defense. And the DoD issued a report that says, yeah, what their operations are in that band, they can share it with commercial users and the federal users, and giving them priority over a portion of that band so that they make sure they will use that portion of the band. Spectrum sharing itself is one of the hot topics in the industry right now. Because spectrum is a very scarce resource. There's not a lot of large blocks of spectrum that are available that can be dedicated to wireless broadband services. So how do we get over that problem? One of the ways is to look at areas where spectrum can be shared between incumbent users that have the licenses for that spectrum and new wireless broadband services. The CBRS band is one of the bands that initially did spectrum sharing, and the FCC is using that as a showcase to look at spectrum sharing in other bands as well. There is a open docket that will be released soon to look at the CBRS band and see how we can increase the utility of that band by increasing the power limits that are currently restricted in that band. And this will allow more full power rights, more like you have on regular cell phones, and have a better customer experience on that band, it's believed, once they provide more opening up the power limitations that currently exist on this band. Some of the other things, as mentioned, we're looking forward. Obviously, we're going to have a new FCC commissioner, and the question will be what does that mean as we move forward? If we look at Brendan Carr, and assuming that he will be the FCC chairman after the new administration comes in. He has been a strong advocate of policies to promote the deployment of 5G and other advanced wireless services. He was vocal about the need to expedite the rollout of 5G infrastructure and making more spectrum available for commercial use to facilitate the deployment. When you look at spectrum, all spectrum is not created equal. We have what is known as low band spectrum, mid band spectrum, and high band spectrum. And each area of spectrum, and let me see if I can share this chart with you here. Let's see. Sometimes I have problems sharing in Zoom, but let me give this a shot and see if this works. Can you see that okay?
Yep. Good.
Okay. So the low band spectrum is on the left side, the high band spectrum is on the right side of the screen. And in the middle is what's known as mid-band spectrum. When you look at the low band spectrum, that's typically used for wide coverage and ubiquitous coverage. And you know, it has good propagation characteristics to carry the signal so that you can get wide coverage and support, you know, the typical mobility services that you see today. On the far right-hand side, I'm sorry. Oh, I
Go
thought there was
ahead, Brian. Somebody was.
Yeah. On the far right-hand side, you'll see what's known as upper gigahertz or even into the terahertz frequency ranges. And there's a lot of buzz about this. And the reason there's a lot of buzz about this is because there's a lot of spectrum available up in that range because there's not a lot of users up there. Well, getting a lot of spectrum up in those ranges means you can have very high capacity and support very high data rates because you have more spectrum available. The problem with it is those higher frequencies don't penetrate very well or don't travel very far. So they're not going to penetrate in building very easily, and you're not going to get long distance coverage for those frequencies. So they're very specialized uses for those very high frequencies. Even as you get into the upper mid-band gigahertz frequencies, you do run into some of the challenges of propagation. You know, physics always wins, and propagation, you know, being the challenge will dictate, you know, what type of services could be supported within a given frequency range. There is a sweet spot right in the middle in that mid-band range, the 7 to 24 gigahertz in that range, where you have a good blend of capacity and coverage. You can get pretty good chunks of spectrum available, and that spectrum that's in those ranges do propagate well enough to get you good capacity and good coverage for mobility users. And there's a lot of focus going forward on how we can get more mid-band spectrum in order to support the capacity and coverage that are needed, especially as we move higher and have more broadband. I should talk a bit about fixed wireless access. When you look at these mid and upper mid-band spectrum allocations, many of these are moving towards supporting fixed wireless access because of the challenges that you have with propagation and the deployments of those upper mid-band spectrum and upper gigahertz spectrum. So some of the fixed wireless offerings that you're seeing from the various operators today make use of those upper mid-band spectrum allocations that are made available and are held by those wireless operators. And you know, again, if it's not a mobility, it's really focused on the fixed wireless access. So you don't have to worry so much about the propagation as you would if it were a true mobility type service. So that's where we see some of those applications being as well. So going back to what I was discussing about Brendan Carr. So mid-band spectrum is one of the area we would see a new commission emphasizing the importance of that. Again, balancing that coverage and capacity. Again, I think we need to see if we do get the FCC's auction authority reallocated, and then how that would fit into what spectrum might be available and auctioned off in the future. Some of the other areas obviously are rural connectivity. Brendan Carr has highlighted the importance of ensuring rural and underserved areas are not left behind in the 5G rollout and initiatives to extend wireless service to those regions. And as I mentioned, spectrum sharing is one of the other hot areas that's being discussed within the industry right now. And that again is to look at ways to share spectrum between users. And let me give you one example of spectrum is between DoD users and more specifically DoD radar systems, which operate in some of these gigahertz ranges, and wireless services. Radars don't transmit continuously in the same direction all the time. Typically when you look at a radar dish, it's rotating in order to have the beam go out and detect whatever the radar is trying to detect. Well, that means there's a whole lot of area that currently is that wouldn't be within that radar beam. And the way spectrum sharing would work is when the radar is not transmitting, the wireless services can use it. When the radar would be transmitting, you would turn off the wireless services while that radar is transmitting. So that's a very simplistic way of how spectrum sharing would work for that particular use case. But there's other use cases besides radar systems that spectrum sharing could be used as well. So let me stop there. I see a couple of questions in the chat, potentially. Yeah, I see Paul mentioned increasing power limits would greatly improve use of CBRS. Yeah, exactly, especially to handsets and home routers, etc. That's exactly. And yes, the radar in coastal areas, because we have exclusion zones right now on coastal areas, because many of the Navy installations and Navy ships in coastal areas do have radar transmissions that would fall under this.
I have a quick question, if I may. Gordon Fuller, Tucson. I've represented the inventors and the patents for years, the multispectral company. Ultra-wideband. I'm interested in it for spatial computing, particularly inside of communities and indoors. And I'm wondering what might happen with ultra-wideband and where that fits into this picture.
That's not an area of my expertise, and I haven't looked at it in a while. I know there in the past there's been a lot of excitement and discussions around ultra wideband and ultra wideband solutions, but to be honest, that's not something I've looked at recently, and I haven't heard much about that recently in any of the circles I've been in. So if you want to drop me a note, I can do some research for you, Gordon, and see if I can get some information on that.
Thank you very much. I think it could be the great way for mesh networks to work from our cell phones, particularly in disasters when the internet is down.
Yeah, please drop me an email. I'd like to talk with you more about that. I'll put my email in the chat.
So Brian, what do you see about and what we think that the FCC might address in terms of all the satellites now that are being launched? Obviously, Starlink and I believe Amazon, and not sure who else is launching satellites at this point.
Yeah, AST is the other big one. There's yeah.
So is there going to be any limits or restrictions, or so it's all going to be wide open, or what's your perspective? It'd be it's a lot of satellites.
it's a lot of satellites, and I know there's a lot of concerns in management of the satellite constellations and collision and avoidance and so forth. The other big thing, from our perspective, is interference with ground terrestrial networks. Especially when we're talking about direct to handset. And when I say direct to device or direct to handset, what I mean is that your cell phone that you have today would work from a cell tower in the sky. It would use the same frequencies, it would use the same communication protocols and so forth that your handset would use for the terrestrial network, only the cell tower is 100 whatever miles up in the sky instead of being on the ground. So that obviously has a lot of interference considerations. How do you make sure that satellite network doesn't interfere with the terrestrial network? Because interference with terrestrial network obviously is going to reduce capacity. It's going to cause major problems with the terrestrial network. So that's one area that has to be engineered carefully as those satellite constellations are deployed. Then you have the whole question about your regulatory services, such as 911, for example, as being one. If you're in a satellite coverage area and you dial 911, how do you get that call routed to the proper public safety answering point that needs to handle that call? So that again is another one of the issues. The regulatory services that are required by mobile devices and mobile operators. How do we make sure that these satellite services will be able to support those and make sure that there is no degradation of those services as we transition to the satellite. And yeah, you're right. I think there needs to be close coordination between the satellite operators, the mobile operators, and the regulatory bodies to make sure that it's not the wild, wild west, just deploy satellites and go for it, but it's done in a structured manner, and that the services that we have today are continuous across the new satellite environments.
Okay. Other questions for Brian? So Brian, one other question from me is, so I know security is a big area of focus for you. Can you talk a little bit about security with all of this new technology, and of course what again might have happened or not happened with the FCC?
Yeah, well, I think security is always going to be front and center, no matter which FCC commissioner you have. Obviously, and I saw in the chat, we've heard recently about this security breach from China on some of the older equipment and some of the things. I can't talk too much about that because that's still an ongoing investigation and working with the FCC and even Congress on that. But, we've seen in recent days where there's been suggestions that you even use encrypted applications and over-the-top services to provide better encryption level of service end to end. And whether we need to go that far or not, I think there's still a lot of discussions on that. But yes, we have to make sure security is front and center. Certainly, we talked about the rip and replace program. I think there's still work to be done to make sure that the supply chain security is intact and we have a trusted supply chain for deployment of equipment within the networks. I think when we look at what's known as the Open Radio Access Network or Open RAN initiatives that are being done, those are being done to help with the supply chain and bring new entrants into the supply chain so there's more options available to operators to deploy equipment. I asked Morgan one of the questions about the Wireless Innovation Fund, which was meant to spur innovation in that area. And that's, again, one of the questions that's outstanding is what happens with that under the new administration, under NTIA. Will that Wireless Innovation Fund that's meant to enhance our supply chain, will that continue or not? So that's another outstanding question. But yes, security, I think, will always be front and center. I don't see that changing. In fact, I probably will say there'll be more emphasis on it, given more of the America First themes that we hear, and we'll see where it goes.
Other questions for Brian? So John Haas, you want to talk a little bit? You've been sharing a couple of things in the in the chat.
Sure. Next week we have DHS and CISA, since it started out with some concerns about security. They are hosting a workshop, and this is meant for people of all flavors, uh, education, healthcare, people that may not have as much awareness as perhaps the people on this call, but some people here could benefit from learning. It's a 3-hour workshop held at Embry-Riddle, but hosted by DHS and CISA on physical and cybersecurity. So if you're in the area, next Wednesday, come join. It will be only real time, in person, not hybrid.
Hey, John, you might tell people, because I'm not sure everybody on this call knows what CISA is.
Ah, yeah. So the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency is a part of DHS, and they are focused primarily on the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, and communications, by golly, is one of those critical infrastructures. Other critical infrastructures, of course, include electrical, water, natural gas, telecommunications, transportation, uh, retail. There's 16 of them. And I think voting was the most recent critical infrastructure added. I think that was in 2017. So those are the areas that they're focused.
Okay, thank you, John. Anything else that anybody wants to share this morning? We're getting about out of time for day. Malwa, do you have anything else that you want to give us an update about? You kind of track all this stuff happening.
Yeah, yeah,
Happening or not happening, as the case might be.
That's true. Almost everything has been shared except one thing that I noticed that we didn't share, and that is that the Supreme Court has agreed to review the Fifth Circuit decision that declared the federal USF unconstitutional. They plan on allocating an hour for oral arguments, and the parties will submit briefs addressed to both, the merit of the case as well as the questions that arose about the constitutionality of the USF funds. So we'll have to wait and see. I don't have a date when this is going to happen unless anyone else has seen it somewhere else. But this is a real precedent, and we are glad that they are listening to it. Listening to the oral arguments. God knows what the results are going to be, but hopefully that at least by listening to it, they are going to hear the arguments for and against. So let's hope there's some movement in that area.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't have any other updates that have not been discussed so far.
Okay. Thanks, Mama.
I have one, if that's all right, Steve. Gordon
Sure,
Perry here.
Gordon. Go ahead.
Just real quick, today is the second day of what's called Site Tech, and that's being done out of my former town of Palo Alto, California. And you've never really quite had the picture of what 10 minutes in the future is going to look like. This is the best place to find out. This is all the blind technologists from around the world gathered together, showcasing what AI and assistive technology can do and will become. So if you're looking for a crash course that it makes you fully knowledgeable and embracing of the concept of what any of these communications technologies will evolve to do for us as humans, I'll just put forward one of the themes of the conference, and that is, we believe people in the future will recognize people with disabilities in their contributions to using these technologies will be the innovators for the future. So I certainly feel that way. Anyway, KLO is putting the link in, and definitely it's up on YouTube. It'll be there all of the conference. Yesterday's was astonishing. I have to say, I'm very much a techie, but some of the things that were showcased are just going to change the world for everybody, not just people that are blind, but these ideas mean that all of us will have an incredible new tool at our disposal with AI and the integration of these things. Check it out.
Yeah. Thanks, Gordon. I was going to send that out, but then it started, I guess yesterday or today. So, but it is going to be available online on an ongoing basis, if I'm not mistaken. So
If you do
to
site, like seeing site, SIGHT, Siri will insist that it's site, SITE, like a website, but no, site, SIGHT, tech, TECH, all one word, boom, you're in.
Okay.
No registration required.
Okay. Any other announcements for today? Going one. Anthony, do you have anything that you want to update us on regarding the state library?
No, Steve, not any updates today.
Okay. Kelly, anything else you want to talk about? Kelly Mukherjee?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Like always, we are always looking for community impact stories. So if anyone has any to share, as one, we continue to interview. On average, every 1 to 2 weeks, we have a wonderful story about Gordon Fuller. As you saw, Mala is collecting some stories to also add to as one. So we are happy to share your positive impact stories to help the community understand all the great work that you're doing. So if you would like to work with me on that, please feel free to reach out. I can put my contact information in the chat. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. So give me a second here. Okay. Anybody else have anything that they want to share? If not, I believe we are done for today. So we have one more meeting before the end of the year, and then we will be off for a few weeks for everybody to enjoy their holidays. And I guess nobody wants to meet on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. I can see Paul appreciating that. Paul, you want to give us any updates on what the latest with you? You always have so many interesting things going on.
I have just finalized my survey for my PhD. So I will be sending you an email later today, Steve, and then we'll be able to distribute that. I'm looking to interview about 20 to 30 people. I'm developing a conceptual model of the digital divide. And right now, I'm at around about 450 components. It'll be the most comprehensive model of the digital divide that's ever been mapped out. And just to give you a little bit of an insight, I've analyzed 788 hours of video for 5.4 million transcribed words as part of my study to date. So that's what I'm working on. But, there's always good things around the corner too.
So, Paul, I always say I don't know how you sleep with all the research that you do and all the writing and everything else, how you ever find time to sleep or take time off for that matter.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, Paul, maybe you want to talk to us next week with more detail about what you're working on.
I could certainly do that.
Okay. But I'll talk to you offline. Let's talk about that. Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts that people have? If not, I believe we are done for today.